A silver Koenigsegg Agera screams down an empty stretch of highway at 200 miles per hour. Inside, three drivers push million-dollar machines to their absolute limits. Then, metal meets metal. Glass explodes. One car flips, tumbles, and bursts into flames. In the wreckage, a friendship dies, a rivalry turns deadly, and a 2-year prison sentence begins for a crime that was never supposed to happen. This is where Need for Speed starts. Not with a hero's journey, but with a fall from grace so brutal it'll take crossing an entire continent at breakneck speed to make things right. Released in March 2014, Need for Speed arrived at a peculiar moment in cinema. The Fast and Furious franchise had already claimed its throne as the king of car-based action, delivering increasingly outrageous spectacle with each installment. Meanwhile, audiences were hungry for something grittier, something that felt more grounded in the visceral thrill of actual driving rather than physics-defying CGI stunts. Enter director Scott Waugh and a script from George and John Gattens that promised to adapt the legendary racing video game franchise into something Hollywood hadn't quite delivered yet, a legitimate car movie built on practical stunts, real speeds, and consequences that actually matter. But here's what makes Need for Speed fascinating. It's not trying to be Fast and Furious. It's not about heists or family speeches over Corona. Instead, it channels a different energy entirely. The cross-country revenge thriller, the blue-collar redemption arc, the underdog story wrapped in a 900-horsepower shell. Aaron Paul, fresh off his Emmy-winning turn as Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad, steps into the role of Toby Marshall, a small-town mechanic and street racer from Mount Kisco, New York. Toby's a guy who lives for the perfect shift, the clean apex, the pure connection between driver and machine. He's not a criminal mastermind. He doesn't run an international smuggling ring. He fixes cars, races on weekends, and dreams of something bigger that always seems just out of reach. Then Dino Brewster walks back into his life. Played with slick arrogance by Dominic Cooper, Dino represents everything Tobey isn't: wealth, status, success in professional racing. He's a former IndyCar driver with corporate backing and an ego the size of his bank account. But underneath that polished exterior is something dangerous. A man who can't stand being second best, especially not to a small town, nobody like Tobey. When Dino offers Tobey a partnership to finish building a custom Ford Mustang, a tribute Shelby Mustang designed by the late Carroll Shelby himself, it seems like an opportunity to prove his skills on a bigger stage. The car is sleek, powerful, a rolling piece of American muscle car mythology rebuilt for the modern era. And when Tobey manages to push it to 234 miles per hour at a test track, shattering expectations and humiliating Dino in front of a wealthy buyer named Julia Madden, the cracks in their partnership start to show. Julia, played by Imogen Poots, isn't just window dressing in this story. She's a British exotic car broker with encyclopedic knowledge of automotive history and a sharp wit that cuts through the testosterone-fueled posturing around her. She buys the Mustang for $2.7 million, recognizing both its craftsmanship and the raw talent of the man who built it. But that sale, that moment of triumph for Tobey, becomes the spark that ignites everything. Dino can't handle being upstaged. His pride won't allow it. So he does what narcissists do when they feel threatened. He issues a challenge that's designed not to compete, but to destroy. The race he proposes isn't some sanctioned event with safety crews and ambulances on standby. It's 3 drivers, 3 Koenigsegg Agera hypercars borrowed from Dino's uncle, and a midnight run from a mansion to a bridge over Interstate 684. The Ageras are illegal in the United States because their engines are too powerful, too unregulated, machines built for speed without compromise. Tobey accepts because that's what racers do. And Little Pete, played by Scott Mescudi, better known as Kid Cudi, joins them because he believes in Tobey, because he's loyal, because he doesn't see the darkness lurking behind Dino's smile. What happens next isn't just the inciting incident of the plot. It's the emotional core that drives every mile of the 2,700 miles Tobey will eventually cross. During the race, Pete's winning. He's ahead of both Tobey and Dino, laughing through the radio, living in that perfect moment where skill and machine become one. But Dino can't accept it. He makes contact. Metal scrapes. Pete's Agera loses control, flips, and erupts in flames. Tobey rushes to the wreckage, trying desperately to save his friend. But there's nothing he can do except watch Pete die in an inferno of twisted carbon fiber and burning fuel. Dino doesn't stop. He doesn't call for help. He hides his car, wipes away the evidence, and when the police arrive, he pins everything on Tobey. 2 cars, Dino claims. Not 3. Just Tobey and Pete, stealing his uncle's hypercars for a joyride that went tragically wrong. Without proof, without witnesses, Tobey's arrested for vehicular manslaughter and grand theft auto. The system doesn't care about his version of events. It doesn't matter that he's telling the truth. Dino's wealth and connections provide insulation. Tobey's sent to prison for 2 years while Dino continues his life uninterrupted, eventually getting engaged to Tobey's ex-girlfriend Anita, who also happens to be Pete's sister. It's a betrayal so layered, so calculated, that it transforms Tobey's grief into something colder and more focused. The need for justice, or maybe just revenge, delivered at 200 miles per hour. Es. When Tobey's released on parole, he doesn't want forgiveness or closure. He wants vindication. And there's only one place that can provide it: the De Leon, an underground supercar race so exclusive that most racers only hear about it in whispers. Organized by a mysterious figure known only as Monarch, voiced with theatrical flair by Michael Keaton in what amounts to a radio DJ performance for the street racing underworld. The De Leon is invitation only, winner take all, and completely illegal. Racers from across the country bring their most extreme machines to compete on open roads along the California coast, pushing toward Point Arena Lighthouse, where Monarch supposedly watches from his hidden perch. Win the De Leon, and you're not just the fastest, you're a legend. But here's the catch: Tobey's in New York, and the De Leon starts in San Francisco in less than 45 hours. He doesn't have a car capable of making the cross-country run and winning the race. He doesn't have money. What he does have is the Mustang, the same Shelby tribute car he built, now owned by Julia, who's storing it in San Francisco. So Tobey makes a deal. She'll let him race the Mustang if she can ride along to protect her investment. It's a partnership born of necessity, not trust, and it kicks off a coast-to-coast chase that becomes the backbone of the film. Us. This is where Need for Speed shifts gears from setup to execution. Tobey isn't just racing against time, he's racing against the entire system. Dino's mobilized to stop him. Using his wealth and influence, Dino places a bounty on the Mustang, destroy Tobey's car before he reaches San Francisco, and collect a cool $1 million. Suddenly, every opportunistic gearhead with a fast car and loose morals becomes a potential obstacle. Meanwhile, law enforcement across multiple states receives tips about a silver Mustang traveling at insane speeds, turning the journey into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. But Tobey doesn't make this run alone. He's supported by a crew that's as crucial to the story as any character riding in the Mustang. There's Benny, the eccentric mechanic and helicopter pilot who provides aerial reconnaissance and comic relief in equal measure. Finn, played by Rami Malek before his Oscar-winning turn in Bohemian Rhapsody, serves as the tech genius feeding Tobey real-time traffic data and route adjustments. Joe Peck, the crew strategist, and Jody, the muscle, round out a team bound together by loyalty and shared grief over Pete's death. They're not just helping Tobey win a race, they're helping him reclaim his honor and expose Dino's lies. The journey itself becomes a cinematic showcase for practical stunt work that feels almost anachronistic in an era dominated by green screens and digital doubles. Scott Waugh, whose background includes extensive stunt coordination work, made a deliberate choice to shoot Need for Speed with minimal CGI. Real cars hitting real speeds on real roads. Actors actually driving after intensive training instead of sitting in front of projection screens. Stunts choreographed with mathematical precision. Stunt coordinators spent weeks calculating exact speeds and forces needed to flip cars, launch vehicles through the air, and orchestrate near misses that look impossibly close because they actually are impossibly close. When a cop car gets launched via compressed air and barely misses a Bugatti Veyron traveling at exactly 60 miles per hour, you're watching something that genuinely happened on set, not something assembled in post-production by VFX artists. That commitment to practical filmmaking gives Need for Speed a visceral quality that separates it from its contemporaries. You feel the weight of these machines. You sense the danger in every high-speed maneuver. And when crashes happen, and they happen spectacularly, there's a brutal authenticity to the destruction. This isn't a cartoon where characters walk away from 100-foot drops without a scratch. This is a world where physics matters, where consequences exist, where Pete's death haunts every frame as a reminder that speed can kill. Of course, the film isn't without its dramatic liberties. The idea that someone could drive from New York to San Francisco in 45 hours while evading nationwide law enforcement and participating in multiple high-speed chases stretches credibility to its breaking point. But Need for Speed isn't interested in realism. It's interested in myth-making, in crafting a modern tall tale where the open road becomes a proving ground for honor, skill, and the kind of redemption that can only be earned behind the wheel. It's Shane with supercars, High Noon with horsepower, a western disguised as a car movie where the final showdown happens on asphalt instead of dusty streets. The De Leon itself, when Tobey finally arrives, represents everything the underground racing scene romanticizes. No rules, no restrictions, just pure driving on treacherous coastal highways where one mistake sends you over a cliff into the Pacific. Dino's there too, having secured his own invitation, driving a Lamborghini Elemento and carrying the weight of his secrets. The race becomes more than competition. It's a reckoning. And in the film's climax, when Tobey has to choose between winning and saving the man who destroyed his life, the decision he makes reveals whether he's truly different from Dino or if revenge has turned him into the same kind of monster. Yes, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we dissect how the story unfolds across 3 acts of cross-country chaos, before we analyze the characters who inhabit this world and the technical craft that brings their journey to life, we need to understand what Need for Speed is trying to accomplish as a piece of action cinema. It's a film that wears its influences on its sleeve: Bullet, Vanishing Point, The Cannonball Run, while trying to forge its own identity in an overcrowded genre. It's a movie that values the rumble of an engine over clever dialogue, that believes a perfectly executed drift can communicate emotion more effectively than a monologue. It's unapologetically earnest in its love for car culture, for the bond between driver and machine, for the idea that some debts can only be settled at terminal velocity. Released to mixed reviews and moderate box office success, Need for Speed didn't spawn a franchise or redefine the racing genre. But it occupies an interesting space in 2014's cinematic landscape, a film that dared to commit fully to practical action in an age of digital excess, that cast a prestige TV actor in a role designed to showcase intensity over star power, and that asked audiences to invest in a revenge story where the stakes are simultaneously deeply personal and completely absurd. It's a movie that knows exactly what it is: a high-octane Valentine to American car culture, delivered with sincerity and a willingness to total million-dollar hypercars in pursuit of that perfect shot. So buckle up, because we're about to take a deep dive into every mile of Toby Marshall's journey from convicted felon to De Leon champion, examining how Need for Speed balances its video game roots with cinematic ambition, how it constructs action sequences that thrill despite their predictability, and how it ultimately argues that redemption isn't about forgiveness. It's about proving, once and for all, who you really are when everything's on the line and the finish line is the only thing that matters. Continuing the journey, the story section now shifts into how Need for Speed structures its narrative, starting with Tobey's fall and building toward his impossible goal, the De Leon. From the beginning, the plot orients itself around humiliation, injustice, and the need to clear a name, using that early catastrophic race as emotional fuel for everything that follows. Instead of treating those opening events as mere setup, the script heaps that loss alive through Tobey's memories, the crew's grief, and the shadow it casts over every decision he makes afterward. The first act establishes a surprisingly grounded world for a film based on a racing game, anchoring the spectacle in a specific community and a small-town garage that feels lived in rather than glossy. Tobey and his crew run Marshall Motors, a shop that restores and tunes cars with care, not just for profit, and that blue-collar identity becomes part of the story's spine as they get pulled into bigger, more dangerous arenas. When Dino reappears with the unfinished Mustang project, the film plants its key narrative seed. This isn't just a job. It's the chance for Tobey to prove he's as talented as any professional racer who ever dismissed him. The dynamics around that Mustang set up the film's central tension long before the fatal race. Dino arrives with money and swagger. Acting like success gives him the right to dictate terms, while Tobey and his team bring skill, passion, and a sense of pride in their craft. The test run where Tobey pushes the car beyond expectations doesn't just showcase its power, it flips the power balance between the two men, exposing Dino's insecurity and jealousy in front of Julia and the buyer. That moment of public embarrassment is what turns Dino from an arrogant rival into a genuine threat, setting up a revenge story that works on both sides. Tobey wants justice, but Dino wants to erase the man who made him look weak. Once the accident happens and Tobey goes to prison, the narrative compresses time, skipping those 2 years, and dropping us back into his life the day he walks out with a new mission. The script doesn't waste scenes on adjustment or reintegration. It treats his incarceration as a scar that's already healed over, channeling everything into forward motion. That choice keeps the pacing tight and makes the decision to chase the De Leon feel like the only path forward, not just a wild idea tossed out for spectacle's sake. The road trip structure that follows turns the middle of the film into a string of escalating set pieces connected by a clear ticking clock. reach San Francisco before registration closes for Monarch's secret race. Each leg of the journey introduces a new type of obstacle. Other racers looking for Dino's bounty, state troopers, traffic patterns, and geography itself, so the film doesn't rely on one kind of chase repeated over and over. The script uses these stops and near collisions to reveal dynamics between Toby and Julia, as well as the broader crew, building relationships while the wheels stay in motion. Monarch's presence over the airwaves provides a structural hook that keeps pulling the story toward the West Coast. He's always broadcasting, always narrating, turning rumors into a kind of folk legend around Toby's run as word spreads through the underground racing community. Every time he mentions Toby, Dino, and the Mustang on his pirate broadcasts, the stakes rise, because more people know what's coming, and more eyes are on whether this ex-con can actually make it to the starting line. The script uses Monarch as a chorus figure, someone who both mythologizes the race and explains its rules without slowing the story down with exposition scenes. Structurally, the film respects a classic three-act spine, setup in Mount Kisco, cross-country escalation, and final confrontation at the De Leon. What keeps it from feeling purely formulaic is how intensely it leans into the physicality of racing as storytelling. Plots advance through decisions behind the wheel, not long conversations in rooms. When Toby chooses a dangerous shortcut, doubles back to mislead cops, or sacrifices precious time to avoid hurting civilians, those actions define his character as much as any line of dialogue. Even though Need for Speed comes from a video game brand with minimal built-in narrative, the film's story isn't structured like a series of levels or missions. Instead, it feels closer to a road movie fused with a revenge thriller where distance traveled equals emotional progress. Every state line crossed brings Toby closer to the man who ruined his life, but it also forces him to confront what he's willing to risk, his freedom, his crew's safety, and the possibility that even exposing Dino won't bring Pete back. The script never fully forgets that reality, and that lingering sense of loss gives the high-speed chaos a foundation that feels more human than game-like. At the same time, the story consciously embraces absurdity in its premise. A fugitive racer broadcasting his intentions across the underground scene while law enforcement scrambles to catch up. Rather than trying to justify every leap with logic, the film leans into the heightened tone of a folk legend, where the details might not all hold up, but the momentum and emotional clarity carry you through. That balance between sincerity and exaggeration is part of why the narrative can sustain so many set pieces without collapsing under its own weight. As the cross-country journey barrels toward California, the story narrows its focus. Side characters peel away or take supporting positions off the road, leaving Toby, Julia, and Dino as the main pillars heading into the De Leon. The narrative stakes crystallize into two clear objectives: prove Dino caused Pete's death, and win the race that's supposed to crown the fastest driver in this underground world. Those twin goals give the third act a clean line of tension. Every risk Toby takes has to serve both justice and victory, or he loses everything he's bled for across thousands of miles. By the time the De Leon begins, the film has spent enough time on the journey that the final race feels earned, not just a final level tagged on for spectacle. Each crash, each narrow escape, each moment of improvisation has served to build the legend around Toby, turning him from a wrongfully convicted mechanic into the kind of mythic driver who belongs in Monarch's legendary contest. That sense of culmination is what gives the story its forward drive. Even when the outcome seems predictable, this is less about whether the hero will win and more about what he'll sacrifice to get there. If you'd like, the next segment can break this narrative down, act by act in more detail, mapping specific scenes to the traditional three-act structure and exploring how the pacing works across the full runtime. The film wastes no time establishing what drives its protagonist before systematically dismantling that identity. Toby Marshall exists in a world where reputation means everything, not corporate sponsorships or magazine covers, but respect earned through skill, consistency, and loyalty to the people who matter. His garage operates on thin margins, fixing up classic American muscle for clients who trust his eye and his hands more than any dealership mechanic. This isn't glamorous work, but it's honest, and the film makes sure we understand that before introducing the temptation that will crack everything wide open. Dino's entrance disrupts that equilibrium immediately. He doesn't just walk in with money, he walks in with history, with old connections to Toby's crew, and with the kind of casual dismissiveness that comes from never having to prove himself on back roads at midnight. The Mustang project he brings represents validation. If Toby can finish what Carroll Shelby started, If he can build something that redefines American performance, maybe he breaks out of Mount Kisco's gravitational pull. The script uses this partnership to show how ambition clouds judgment, how the promise of recognition can make someone ignore warning signs they'd normally catch. Julia's arrival to inspect the finished Mustang introduces a wildcard element that complicates the male rivalry brewing beneath the surface. She's not there to admire chrome or listen to engine notes. She's there to assess value, both mechanical and financial. Her knowledge surprises everyone in the garage, particularly Dino, who expected a buyer's representative to nod politely while men talked shop. When Tobey takes her for the test drive that hits 234 miles per hour, the scene does double duty. It shows Julia recognizing genuine talent, and it shows Dino realizing he's no longer the most impressive person in the room. Itch guy. That test drive becomes the fulcrum on which the first act tips into tragedy. Dino's wounded pride manifests as the challenge. 3 cars, 1 finish line, winner takes bragging rights, and a cut of the Mustang sale. The script positions this race as inevitable the moment Tobey humiliates him, because men like Dino can't accept being second, especially when the person beating them comes from nowhere. Little Pete's decision to join feels natural given his bond with Tobey, but it also plants the emotional bomb that will detonate minutes later. The race itself unfolds with a kind of terrible momentum, beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. 3 Koenigsegg Ageras carving through midnight highways, their headlights cutting tunnels through darkness, their engines screaming at frequencies that make windows vibrate blocks away. The cinematography captures both the exhilaration and the danger, never letting us forget that these machines can kill as easily as they can thrill. When Pete pulls ahead, laughing through the radio about how he's going to win, there's genuine joy in that moment, right before Dino decides winning matters more than friendship, more than safety, more than anything. The collision happens fast. 1 second, Pete's leading. The next, his car's airborne, tumbling end over end before slamming into the ground and erupting in flames. Tobey stops immediately, sprinting toward the wreck, while Dino accelerates away into the night. The script lingers on Tobey's desperate attempts to reach Pete through the inferno, on his realization that there's nothing he can do except watch someone he loves die because of a race that never should have happened. That image, Tobey, kneeling in front of burning wreckage, sirens growing louder in the distance, closes the first act with brutal finality. Dino's betrayal compounds the tragedy by weaponizing the legal system. Without proof of a third car, without witnesses willing to contradict a wealthy IndyCar driver's version of events, Tobey becomes the villain of his own story. The manslaughter and theft charges stick because the narrative Dino constructs. 2 friends stealing supercars, 1 race going wrong, sounds more plausible to investigators than the truth. Prison swallows Tobey whole, erasing 2 years in a single cut that communicates isolation and helplessness more effectively than montages could. Act 2. The road becomes the arena. Tobey's release triggers the second act with immediate clarity of purpose. There's no soul-searching, no debate about what comes next, only the singular focus of a man who spent 730 days planning exactly how to expose the person who destroyed his life. The De Leon represents the only stage where that exposure matters, because Monarch's race exists outside conventional structures, where reputation and skill override wealth and connections. Getting Dino to that race, forcing him to compete on equal terms, becomes the mission that justifies every illegal mile between New York and California.us. The bargain with Julia to use the Mustang she now owns introduces the unlikely partnership that will anchor the cross-country segment. She's protective of her investment, but also curious about the driver who built something extraordinary, and her decision to ride along rather than simply hand over keys speaks to a gambler's instinct beneath her professional exterior. Their initial interactions crackle with tension. She doesn't trust him, he resents needing her permission. But the road has a way of wearing down those defenses when survival depends on cooperation. Benny's helicopter support gives the journey an operational complexity that elevates it beyond simple point-to-point racing. From above, he spots roadblocks, identifies alternate routes, and provides running commentary that balances tactical information with personality. The aerial perspective also allows the film to showcase the geography they're crossing, turning America itself into a character, vast, indifferent, and full of both beauty and danger. When Benny guides Tobey through narrow gaps in traffic or warns about police positioning, those moments feel less like video game assistance and more like military coordination adapted for civilian chaos. The bounty Dino places on the Mustang transforms every encounter into potential combat, Racers emerge from nowhere. Detroit, Chicago, the Southwest, each convinced they can claim that million-dollar prize by forcing Tobey off the road or disabling his car permanently. These confrontations vary in intensity and creativity. Some involve pure speed duels on highways. Others require navigating urban environments where tight corners and pedestrian traffic add layers of complication. The film uses these sequences to show Tobey's adaptability, his ability to read situations instantly and make split-second decisions that keep him alive and moving forward. One standout sequence involves a Detroit street race where local crews challenge Tobey's right to pass through their territory uncontested. The scene layers multiple obstacles, tight city streets, aggressive competitors, and police presence into a kinetic puzzle that Tobey solves through precision rather than brute force. He doesn't try to overpower the other drivers. Instead, he finds lines through the chaos that others miss, threading gaps that close seconds after he passes through them. This approach reinforces the film's core philosophy. Great driving isn't about who has the fastest car, it's about who can extract maximum performance from whatever they're piloting. The relationship between Tobey and Julia deepens as miles accumulate. Initially adversarial, their dynamic shifts when she realizes he's not reckless. He's calculated, constantly assessing risk versus reward in ways that protect both of them. Her British reserve gradually thaws as she witnesses his commitment, not just to reaching the De Leon, but to honoring Pete's memory by refusing shortcuts that compromise safety for civilians. There's a scene where Tobey slows down to avoid a family in a minivan, costing precious time, and Julia's expression communicates recognition. This isn't about glory, it's about proving he's different from Dino. Law enforcement escalates their pursuit as Tobey's run gains notoriety through Monarch's broadcasts. What starts as local police involvement expands to state troopers, highway patrol, and eventually federal interest as the Mustang crosses state lines while violating dozens of traffic laws. The film treats these encounters with surprising restraint. Tobey never deliberately endangers officers, instead using superior driving skills to evade rather than confront. One chase ends with him outrunning a helicopter by navigating terrain. The aircraft can't follow, a sequence that showcases both the Mustang's capabilities and Tobey's intimate understanding of how to use landscape as an ally. Finn's technical support from the garage back in New York adds another operational layer. He hacks traffic systems to give Tobey green lights, monitors police radio frequencies to warn of roadblocks, and coordinates timing with Benny's aerial reconnaissance to ensure nothing catches them by surprise. This team dynamic prevents the journey from feeling like a solo endeavor. Tobey may be behind the wheel, but his crew's investment in his success keeps the emotional stakes distributed across multiple characters, who all lost something when Pete died. The mounting tension comes from more than external threats. As the deadline approaches, mechanical issues start emerging from pushing the Mustang beyond its design limits for thousands of miles at sustained high speeds. A near-catastrophic engine problem forces an emergency repair stop, where the crew debates whether the car can even make it to California, much less win the De Leon. These moments ground the spectacle in reality. No machine, regardless of how well built, can endure this kind of abuse indefinitely. Dino's presence looms over the entire cross-country segment, even though he rarely appears on screen. Monarch's broadcasts mention him accepting an invitation to the De Leon, confirming that the confrontation Tobey's racing toward will actually happen. The script uses this absence cleverly, letting Dino exist primarily in Tobey's mind and Julia's increasingly pointed questions about what actually happened 2 years ago. Her gradual belief in his innocence provides an emotional anchor for the second act, giving Tobey an ally who matters beyond tactical support. The act builds toward the moment when Tobey finally crosses into California with hours to spare, battered but intact, having survived everything Dino and the authorities could throw at him. The Mustang limps into San Francisco, not as a pristine show car, but as a battle-scarred testament to determination. That visual transformation, gleaming silver, now marked by scrapes, dents, and road grime, communicates the cost of this journey more effectively than dialogue could. Tobey hasn't just traveled across a continent, he's fought for every mile, and now the real test begins. Act 3, The Reckoning at Point Arena. The De Leon transforms the story from chase thriller into gladiatorial contest. Monarch reveals the course: coastal highways north of San Francisco, ending at Point Arena Lighthouse, where the Pacific crashes against cliffs, and introduces the field of competitors who've gathered for this illegal spectacle. Each driver represents a different regional racing culture, from European exotics to American muscle to modified imports, but Dino's Lamborghini Elemento stands out as the most advanced machine present. The script uses this disparity to heighten tension. Tobey's exhausted Mustang versus Dino's fresh hypercar, skill versus power, justice versus wealth. The race itself operates without rules beyond reaching the finish first. No penalties for contact, no regulations about passing zones, just open roads and the understanding that survival isn't guaranteed. This lawlessness suits Tobey perfectly. It strips away the advantages Dino relied on in legitimate racing, reducing everything to pure driving ability under extreme pressure. As the pack launches from the starting line, the film shifts into its highest gear, delivering the set piece it's been building toward for 90 minutes. E.U. What follows is a masterclass in practical stunt choreography stretched across treacherous terrain. The coastal highway provides natural drama, sheer drops to the ocean on one side, rock faces on the other, curves that tighten without warning. Drivers jostle for position through switchbacks, where one mistake means death, their cars screaming through gears as elevation changes rapidly. The cinematography captures both the technical precision required and the visceral thrill of watching million-dollar machines pushed to absolute limits. Tobey and Dino end up leading the pack, their rivalry crystallizing into a duel that's been inevitable since Pete's death. They trade positions through technical sections, each knowing the other's driving style intimately from years of competition. The script doesn't portray Dino as incompetent. He's genuinely skilled, which makes his moral failures more damning. He could have won fairly 2 years ago. He chose violence instead because winning mattered more than integrity. The climactic moment arrives when a multi-car crash blocks the road ahead. Dino accelerates through the wreckage without hesitation, his Lamborghini threading gaps with inches to spare. Tobey faces a choice: follow that same aggressive line and risk causing injuries, or find another way that costs time but keeps his conscience clear. He brakes, checks for casualties, and only proceeds when he's certain no one's trapped in the wreckage. That decision, choosing human life over victory, defines the character difference between protagonist and antagonist more clearly than any dialogue exchange could. To bite that delay, Tobey catches Dino in the final stretch approaching Point Arena. The script delivers its payoff not through Tobey winning cleanly, but through Dino making the same mistake twice. Desperate to maintain his lead, Dino attempts contact just as he did with Pete, trying to force the Mustang off the cliff road. This time Tobey anticipates it, adjusts, and Dino's Lamborghini loses control instead, flipping multiple times before coming to rest. Tobey stops immediately, not to gloat but to pull Dino from the wreckage before it explodes. That rescue completes Tobey's arc from vengeful racer to genuine hero. He doesn't let Dino die even though it would solve all his problems, because proving moral superiority matters more than revenge. As police converge on the scene, Julia produces evidence she's been gathering throughout the cross-country run. Videos, testimonies, proof of Dino's bounty. And the truth about Pete's death finally has documentation that can't be dismissed. Dino's arrested while Tobey crosses the finish line, winning the delay on but sacrificing his freedom to save a life. The resolution handles consequences with surprising maturity for an action film. Tobey returns to prison, but this time with his name cleared and Pete's death avenged. The crew celebrates the moral victory even as their friend faces more time behind bars. Julia waits for him, suggesting their partnership has evolved into something deeper. Monarch closes his broadcast with acknowledgement that Tobey won more than a race. He won back his honor. The film ends not with triumphant spectacle but with quiet satisfaction, the understanding that some victories cost everything and are still worth the price. Aaron Paul brings an intensity to Toby Marshall that feels transplanted directly from his Breaking Bad work, though here channeled through a character operating on the opposite end of the moral spectrum. Where Jesse Pinkman descended into darkness through manipulation and circumstance, Tobey climbs out of wrongful imprisonment through sheer willpower and an unshakable belief in his own innocence. Paul's performance relies heavily on physicality, tight jaw muscles when provoked, hands that constantly move as if searching for something to grip, eyes that track movement with predatory focus during driving sequences. He rarely raises his voice, instead letting silence do the work of conveying rage that's been compressed into diamond-hard resolve over 2 years behind bars. The character's relationship with cars functions as his primary means of emotional expression. Tobey doesn't just drive. He communicates through throttle control, through the angle he takes into corners, through decisions made at 150 miles per hour that reveal his priorities more clearly than any confession. When he slows down to protect civilians during chases, when he checks on crash competitors before continuing races. These aren't calculated PR moves. They're reflexes built from a moral framework that never wavered despite imprisonment. Paul plays these moments without self-congratulation, treating ethical driving as baseline behavior rather than heroic exception. What makes Tobey compelling beyond his technical skills is his awareness that winning the daily on won't actually bring Pete back. There's a scene early in the cross-country run where Julia questions whether revenge will provide closure, and Paul's response, a slight headshake, eyes fixed on the road ahead, communicates that he knows it won't. He's not chasing the race because he believes it will heal anything. He's chasing it because proving Dino's guilt is the only form of justice available in a system that failed him completely. That distinction elevates him from simple revenge protagonist to someone wrestling with the inadequacy of any possible resolution, to grief. Paul's chemistry with the supporting cast, particularly the garage crew, establishes Tobey as a natural leader without making him domineering. He listens when Finn suggests technical solutions, trusts Benny's aerial reconnaissance without second-guessing, and accepts Joe Peck's strategic advice as collaboration rather than subordination. These interactions sketch a history of mutual respect built over years of working together, racing together, and now mourning together. The performance avoids typical inspiring leader speeches, instead showing leadership through competence and consistency under pressure. The physicality Paul brings to driving scenes deserves particular attention. After extensive training with professional racing instructors, he performs much of his own driving on camera, and that authenticity registers in every gear change and steering input. You can see him feeling the car's responses, making micro adjustments based on feedback from tires and suspension. It's not showy or theatrical. It's the focused concentration of someone for whom driving is a language he's fluent in, where millisecond decisions separate success from catastrophe. Dino Brewster, wealth without character. Dominic Cooper constructs Dino as a particular type of American villain, the man born into advantage who mistakes privilege for merit. His portrayal emphasizes calculated charm that can flip into viciousness when challenged, all delivered with a smile that never quite reaches his eyes. Dino doesn't see himself as evil. In his worldview, he's simply protecting what he deserves, and Tobey's skill represents an unfair threat to a natural hierarchy where money and connections should guarantee victory. Cooper plays this narcissism with conviction, never winking at the audience or acknowledging the character's monstrousness. Dino genuinely believes he's the wronged party. The character's professional racing background informs his pathology. He's tasted legitimate success on IndyCar circuits, experienced adulation from crowds, and built an identity around being the fastest, most skilled driver in any room. When Tobey humiliates him during the Mustang test drive, it doesn't just wound his pride, it threatens his entire self-concept. Cooper shows this disintegration through increasingly aggressive body language, through the way Dino's corporate polish cracks to reveal something vicious underneath. The challenge he issues for the Koenigsegg race isn't competition. It's an attempt to restore cosmic order where he belongs on top, and Tobey belongs in his shadow. What makes Dino more than a cartoon antagonist is Cooper's commitment to showing how easily cruelty emerges from insecurity. The decision to force Pete off the road isn't premeditated murder. It's a split-second choice made by someone whose ego can't tolerate losing to a small-town mechanic. Cooper plays that moment without hesitation, just cold calculation followed by immediate disengagement as he accelerates away from the burning wreckage. The absence of remorse afterward, the willingness to frame Tobey for Pete's death, these escalations feel organic to a personality that views other people as obstacles rather than humans with equal value. His relationship with Anita, Pete's sister and Tobey's ex-girlfriend, adds another dimension to his villainy. The script implies he pursued her specifically because she represented another way to hurt Tobey, a trophy taken from a defeated rival. Cooper plays Dino's public affection toward Anita with theatrical excess, always aware of who's watching, treating the engagement as performance rather than genuine connection. It's psychological warfare disguised as romance, another method of ensuring Tobey stays broken and humiliated. During the De Leon finale, Cooper shifts Dino's energy from controlled arrogance to desperate panic. The realization that Tobey might actually beat him, might actually expose his crimes in front of the underground racing community he values, triggers the same violent impulse that killed Pete. That parallel isn't subtle. The film wants us to see that Dino defaults to destruction when his superiority is challenged, making him fundamentally incapable of fair competition. Cooper's performance in the final chase shows fear masquerading as aggression, a cornered animal lashing out because that's the only response he knows. Julia Madden, more than the co-pilot. Imogen Poots brings unexpected depth to what could have been a purely functional role. Julia enters the story as a consummate professional. Her knowledge of automotive history, her ability to assess mechanical value instantly, her British accented precision when discussing specifications, all establish expertise that commands respect in male-dominated spaces. Poots plays these early scenes with defensive confidence, a woman who's learned to overcompensate with knowledge because doubt follows her into every garage and auction house.gt. The decision to accompany Tobey across the country represents a fascinating character choice that Poots sells through gradual revelation of motivations. On the surface, she's protecting a multi-million-dollar investment. Dig deeper, and there's boredom with safe decisions, curiosity about a driver whose skills exceeded every expectation, and perhaps a gambler's instinct that recognizes when the smart bet is actually the crazy one. Poots layers these motivations subtly, never spelling out exactly why Julia commits to such obvious danger, but making each mile traveled feel like a deliberate choice rather than plot necessity. Her dynamic with Tobey evolves through shared peril rather than manufactured romance. Poots and Paul develop chemistry through adjacent survival. She's not swooning over his driving skills, she's matching his intensity with her own brand of fearlessness. When bullets fly during bounty hunter encounters, Julia doesn't scream. She processes threat levels and suggests tactical responses. When the Mustang needs emergency repairs, she doesn't hover uselessly. She assists with competent hands that know their way around engine compartments. Poots plays these moments matter-of-factly, establishing Julia as partner rather than passenger. The interrogation of Tobey's story that Julia conducts throughout the journey gives Poots opportunities to showcase intelligence that goes beyond book learning. She notices inconsistencies in Dino's public statements, recognizes patterns in his behavior that suggest guilt, and begins documenting evidence before Tobey even realizes she's building a case. These investigations happen quietly, almost in background of action sequences, and Poots plays them with the focus of someone assembling a puzzle whose final picture will either vindicate her judgment or reveal she's bet on the wrong man. Ete. Her class background creates interesting tension with the garage crew. Julia comes from wealth and moves through elite automotive circles where six-figure purchases happen casually. Poots doesn't erase that privilege. Instead, she shows Julia becoming aware of how differently Tobey's world operates, where every dollar matters and reputations are built through skill rather than purchased through connections. The transformation isn't radical. She doesn't suddenly become working class, but there's growing respect for what these men have built despite having none of her advantages. By the DeLeon finale, Julia has evolved from skeptical investor to active participant in Tobey's vindication. Poots plays the reveal of evidence she's gathered with quiet triumph, not over Dino's downfall but over her own instincts proven correct. She believed in Tobey when believing required risk, and that faith gets rewarded with truth that will hold up in court. The final scenes suggesting she'll wait for his release from prison feel earned because Poots and Paul have built a relationship based on mutual respect, forged under fire rather than conventional romantic attraction.us. The crew, brotherhood beyond blood. Rami Malek's Finn operates as the crew's technical genius, though genius undersells the creative problem-solving he brings to keeping Tobey connected and informed during the cross-country run. Malek plays Finn with manic energy, barely contained behind wire-rimmed glasses and nervous gestures, a man whose brain processes information 3 steps ahead of conversations happening around him. His hacking of traffic systems, his ability to intercept police communications, his coordination of complex logistics across time zones. These aren't presented as superhuman abilities, but as hard-won skills, practiced obsessively by someone who channels grief into productivity. The performance finds humor in Finn's social awkwardness without mocking the character. He struggles with direct human interaction but thrives when problems reduce to code and electronics, and Malek plays this dichotomy with affection for both sides. When Finn successfully manipulates a traffic grid to give Tobey clear passage through a congested city, his celebration is private, internal. A small fist pump and grin that speaks to someone who finds validation through problem-solving rather than social approval. HQL. Scott Mescudi, better known as Kid Cudi, brings genuine warmth to Little Pete in the limited screen time before the character's death. The friendship between Pete and Tobey reads as authentic brotherhood, inside jokes, comfortable silence, the kind of shorthand that develops between people who've spent years working side by side. Mescudi plays Pete's enthusiasm for the Koenigsegg race with infectious joy, completely unaware he's about to die, and that innocence makes his death more devastating. The performance does crucial work establishing what's lost when Dino forces Pete's car off the road, not just a life, but a specific, irreplaceable person whose absence echoes through every subsequent scene. Ramon Rodriguez's Joe Peck serves as the crew's strategist and voice of reason, though reason is relative when discussing felony cross-country racing. Rodriguez plays Joe with paternal concern for Tobey's safety balanced against understanding that some deaths require settling regardless of cost. His performance provides grounding during planning sequences, asking practical questions about fuel stops and sleep schedules that remind audiences this journey requires logistics beyond just driving fast. Harrison Gilbertson's Jody rounds out the crew as loyal muscle, though the character has less definition than his teammates. Gilbertson still manages to communicate deep friendship through physical presence. He's always positioned near Tobey in group scenes, always ready to follow without questioning, embodying the kind of ride-or-die loyalty that street racing culture romanticizes. Benny, Eyes in the Sky. Ramon Rodriguez's Benny deserves separate analysis for how he transforms what could have been simple tech support into one of the film's most entertaining presences. Flying a helicopter alongside Tobey's cross-country run, providing aerial reconnaissance while maintaining a running commentary that swings from tactical updates to stream-of-consciousness observations, Benny becomes the audience's surrogate, thrilled, terrified, and completely committed to witnessing something extraordinary. Rodriguez plays Benny's fear honestly. He's not a trained pilot undertaking a simple surveillance job. He's a mechanic who learned to fly helicopters pushing civilian aircraft well beyond their intended operational parameters. When turbulence hits or fuel gauges drop into red zones, Rodriguez lets panic show before Benny forces himself back to competence through sheer determination. These moments of vulnerability make his continued support more meaningful. He's choosing to stay despite legitimate terror because friendship demands it. His observations remain useful, his warnings arrive with enough lead time to matter, and his genuine investment in Tobey's success gives the crew dynamic and emotional anchor visible throughout the journey. Monarch, the voice of legend. Michael Keaton's Monarch never appears on screen except as a voice broadcasting over pirate radio frequencies, yet the performance creates one of the film's most memorable characters through pure audio charisma. Keaton plays Monarch as equal parts Carnival Barker, philosopher-poet of automotive culture, and cryptic gatekeeper to an underground world most people don't believe exists. His broadcasts narrate Tobey's cross-country journey like a traveling mythology, elevating street racing from criminal activity to folk legend. What makes the performance work is Keaton's commitment to theatrical excess without irony. Monarch speaks in hyperbolic pronouncements about speed, honor, and the purity of competition unbound by rules, and Keaton delivers these lines with total sincerity. He's not mocking the material, he's inhabiting a character who genuinely believes underground racing represents something sacred, a proving ground where worth gets determined by skill alone. The De Leon itself becomes an extension of Monarch's personality, secretive, dramatic, dangerous, and oddly principled. Through Keaton's voice work, we understand the race as more than just illegal street competition. It's ritual, ceremony, the modern equivalent of knights jousting for honor. That grandiosity could feel ridiculous, but Keaton's performance makes you believe that somewhere, a mysterious figure really does oversee these events from a lighthouse, turning car culture into something approaching mythology. Anita, the unresolved connection. Dakota Johnson's Anita occupies difficult narrative space as Pete's sister, Tobey's ex-girlfriend, and Dino's current fiancée. The script doesn't give her extensive development, but Johnson still communicates complex emotional position through limited scenes. She's torn between loyalty to her dead brother's memory, lingering feelings for Tobey, and commitment to Dino, who she may or may not realize is responsible for Pete's death. Johnson plays Anita's interactions with Tobey after his release with careful ambiguity. Is she complicit in Dino's lies or genuinely deceived? The performance suggests the latter, through subtle distancing from Dino's displays of affection, through the way she watches Tobey with unresolved questions hanging between them. It's a thankless role that exists primarily to complicate Tobey's emotional landscape, but Johnson finds humanity in those complications, sketching a woman trapped between competing loyalties without clear moral path forward. Scott Waugh's directorial approach to Need for Speed stems directly from his background as a veteran stunt coordinator who spent decades orchestrating dangerous sequences for other directors. That history manifests in a production philosophy that treats CGI as last resort rather than first option, insisting that audiences subconsciously distinguish between digital fabrication and actual physical events captured on camera. The decision to perform stunts practically wasn't about nostalgia or purism. It was about visceral impact, about ensuring every collision, flip, and near miss carried weight that computer-generated alternatives struggle to replicate. Us. The scale of this commitment becomes clear when examining specific sequences. The film's stunt team calculated exact speeds needed to launch a police cruiser through the air using compressed air cannons, then positioned a Bugatti Veyron Supersport traveling at precisely 60 miles per hour to pass underneath, with only inches of clearance. That's not a visual effect assembled in post-production. That's months of mathematical planning, test runs, and absolute faith in driver precision executed once on camera, because there's no reset button when you're destroying actual vehicles. The footage carries tension that stems from knowing real stakes were involved, that failure meant hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage and potential injury to stunt performers. Wall worked with cinematographer Shane Hurlbut to develop camera rigs that could capture driving sequences from angles that emphasize speed and danger without relying on chaotic, shaky cam aesthetics. They mounted cameras directly to cars, used helicopters for aerial tracking shots, and positioned crew members in pursuit vehicles that raced alongside the principal cars to maintain dynamic framing. The result is coverage that feels immediate without becoming disorienting, allowing audiences to comprehend geography and spatial relationships even during sequences involving multiple vehicles at high speeds. The production's relationship with automotive manufacturers created both opportunities and constraints. Some brands provided vehicles enthusiastically, recognizing the promotional value of appearing in high-speed action sequences. Others refused, forcing the production to source cars independently or modify existing vehicles to resemble specific models. The Koenigsegg Ageras featured in the opening race presented particular challenges. Importing them legally proved impossible due to emissions regulations, requiring the production to build fiberglass replicas mounted on different chassis that could achieve the necessary performance while remaining visually accurate. Cinematography, speed made visible. Shane Hurlbut's cinematography operates from a principle that speed only registers on screen when viewers have visual reference points to judge movement against. Empty desert highways at 200 miles per hour can look static unless the frame includes elements that communicate velocity, roadside barriers streaking past, distant mountains approaching with alarming rapidity, or other vehicles that seem frozen as the protagonist accelerates past them. Hurlbut uses these techniques throughout Need for Speed, ensuring audiences always comprehend how fast cars are traveling, even when speedometers aren't visible. The color palette shifts across the cross-country journey, reflecting both geographical changes and emotional progression. Early New York sequences favor cooler tones, blues and grays that communicate the industrial grittiness of Tobey's garage and the cold reality of imprisonment. As the Mustang travels west, cinematography warms, incorporating golden hour lighting and saturated desert colors that suggest both physical distance traveled and psychological transformation underway. The De Leon finale on the California coast returns to cooler tones, but now they're naturalistic rather than oppressive, the blue-gray of Pacific fog and overcast skies that frame the climactic confrontation. Nighttime driving sequences present particular technical challenges, maintaining visibility while preserving the drama of darkness. Hurlbut uses practical light sources mounted on vehicles, supplemented by carefully positioned exterior lighting that simulates moonlight without becoming obviously artificial. During the Koenigsegg race that kills Pete, headlights carve tunnels through darkness while the camera captures both the illuminated road ahead and the blackness surrounding the drivers, creating visual claustrophobia that heightens tension before the crash. Slow motion appears sparingly, reserved for moments where Waugh wants audiences to comprehend mechanical details or emotional reactions that happen too quickly at normal speed. When Pete's car begins its fatal tumble, the frame rate drops just enough to track the vehicle's rotation, the shower of debris, Tobey's expression in his rearview mirror as he realizes what's happening. These slow-motion inserts never extend for dramatic excess. They're functional tools that clarify action geography before returning to real-time chaos. The decision to shoot primarily on location rather than closed sets gives Hurlbut's cinematography authentic texture that sound stages can't replicate. Real highways have imperfections, cracks in asphalt, varying shoulder widths, unexpected curves that create visual interest and genuine hazards for drivers. The California coastal sequence benefits enormously from this authenticity, with actual cliffsides dropping into the Pacific visible in frame, communicating stakes that green screen compositing would dilute. Sound design, the language of engines. A car film lives or dies on audio design, on whether engines sound powerful, whether tire squeals communicate loss of traction, whether collisions carry impact that audiences feel in their chests. Need for Speed's sound team recorded each hero vehicle extensively, capturing exhaust notes at different RPMs, the specific whine of turbochargers spooling, the mechanical symphony of transmissions cycling through gears under load. These recordings provide sonic signatures that help audiences track individual cars during multi-vehicle sequences without relying entirely on visual identification. The Shelby Mustang's audio profile becomes a character element in itself. The production used a custom-built V8 that generates a specific growl, deep, muscular, distinctly American in character. Sound designers emphasize this engine note during emotional moments, allowing it to swell and dominate the mix when Tobey makes crucial decisions or pushes the car beyond safe limits. The effect creates subliminal association between the Mustang's voice and Tobey's determination, making the car an extension of his personality rather than mere transportation. Collision sound design balances realism with cinematic impact. Actual car crashes often sound disappointingly flat on recording, requiring enhancement to convey the violence of metal deforming and glass shattering. The sound team layered multiple elements, grinding metal, explosive impacts, rolling debris to construct crashes that feel authentic while delivering the sonic punch audiences expect from action sequences. Pete's death particularly benefits from this approach. The audio of his car flipping and erupting in flames mixed to be horrifying without becoming gratuitous. Environmental sound plays a crucial role in establishing location and atmosphere. The Mustang traveling through different states accumulates sonic textures, urban traffic density in cities, wind rushing through open spaces in plain states, waves crashing during coastal sequences. These elements ground the cross-country journey in specific places rather than generic backgrounds, making geography tangible even during sequences focused primarily on speed. Radio communications between Tobey, Julia, Benny, and the crew create an audio layer that provides exposition and tactical information without requiring cuts away from driving sequences. The sound mix positions these transmissions carefully, loud enough to convey information but processed with radio artifacts that maintain realism. When Benny warns about police roadblocks or Finn provides route updates, the delivery feels organic to the situation rather than convenient narration. Editing, rhythm, and velocity. The editing approach shifts dramatically between different sequence types, recognizing that constant frenetic cutting would exhaust audiences while sustained long takes might bore during action peaks. Editor Paul Rubel works with WAH to establish rhythms appropriate to each scene's emotional content. Quiet character moments in the Mustang use longer takes that let performances breathe, while action sequences accelerate cutting patterns to amplify adrenaline. During the De Leon race, Rubel creates what amounts to visual syntax for high-speed competition. Wide shots establish spatial relationships between competitors. Medium shots capture driving technique and vehicle handling. Close-ups on driver faces communicate emotional stakes, and extreme close-ups on mechanical elements, gear shifters, brake pedals, steering wheels, provide tactile connection to the act of driving. By cycling through these shot types in varying patterns, the editing maintains visual interest across an extended sequence without becoming predictable. Transitions between segments often use momentum from one scene to propel into the next. An engine revving at sequence end matches a cut to tires smoking as the Mustang launches into the next challenge, creating continuous forward drive even when narrative jumps occur. This technique reinforces the film's central metaphor, Tobey constantly moving forward, never stopping, pushing toward vindication, through editing patterns that refuse to pause or reflect. The parallel editing during cross-country sequences intercuts Tobey's driving with crew members monitoring his progress, police coordinating pursuit, and occasionally Dino reacting to news of Tobey's approach. These cutaways provide essential information without disrupting momentum, giving audiences understanding of multiple perspectives without losing focus on the primary journey. Rubel times these interruptions carefully, never staying away from Tobey for so long that tension dissipates. 9. Crash sequences require surgical precision in editing to remain comprehensible. When cars collide at high speeds, events unfold in fractions of seconds, requiring selective use of slow motion and multiple angles to clarify what's happening. Rubel typically establishes crashes at normal speed first, then revisits key moments from different perspectives to show cause and effect, ensuring audiences understand the chain of events that led to each impact. Huge production design, worlds within wheels, the physical environments. Need for Speed inhabits communicate character and status through careful production design choices. Tobey's garage in Mount Kisco looks lived in and functional. Oil-stained floors, walls covered with tools and car posters, workbenches cluttered with ongoing projects. Production designer John Huttman avoided the pristine magazine layout aesthetic that dominates many car films, instead creating a space that feels like real mechanics work there every day. Dino's world presents stark contrast. Sleek corporate spaces, expensive modern furniture, an aesthetic that prioritizes appearance over function. Even his personal garage showcases vehicles as art objects rather than machines meant to be driven and maintained. These design choices reinforce character dynamics without dialogue, showing through environment what kind of men Tobey and Dino are. The Shelby Mustang itself represents the film's most important production design element. Built by actual Ford designers and fabricators, the car needed to look spectacular while remaining drivable for practical stunt work. The final design balances classic Mustang cues with modern performance engineering, creating a vehicle that feels both nostalgic and contemporary. Multiple copies were constructed, pristine versions for beauty shots, reinforced stunt cars for action sequences, and a partially destroyed version for post-crash scenes. Location scouting identified highways and roads that could accommodate high-speed filming with minimal traffic control needs. The production favored routes with natural visual interest, sweeping curves, dramatic elevation changes, distinctive geographical features that would provide cinematic backgrounds without extensive set decoration. The California coastal roads used for the DeLeon offered everything needed: challenging driving conditions, stunning vistas, and inherent danger from cliffside proximity. Direction, balancing spectacle and story. Scott Waugh's directorial hand remains relatively invisible compared to more stylistically aggressive action filmmakers, and that restraint serves the material effectively. He trusts that well-executed stunts speak for themselves without requiring elaborate camera gymnastics or aggressive cutting to manufacture excitement. The confidence to hold shots, to let audiences watch skilled drivers navigate complex situations in something approaching real-time, differentiates Need for Speed from car films that mistake motion for action. Waugh's work with actors emphasizes physical performance and reaction over extensive dialogue. Aaron Paul's best moments come from subtle expressions while driving. The concentration in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he processes information and makes split-second decisions. Waugh frames these moments simply, trusting Paul's performance to convey Tobey's internal state without elaborate close-ups or manipulative music. The decision to minimize CGI represents Waugh's clearest directorial statement. In an era where digital tools can create any visual imaginable, choosing practical effects and real stunts becomes an artistic position about what makes action sequences effective. Waugh's background gave him unique insight into what stunt performers can achieve safely, allowing him to push boundaries while maintaining protocols that protected his crew. Pacing represents perhaps Waugh's most significant challenge. Maintaining momentum across a 2-hour-plus runtime where the central premise, drive from New York to California, doesn't offer obvious act breaks or dramatic reversals. He solves this through escalation, ensuring each major action sequence introduces new elements or raises stakes beyond the previous encounter. By the time the DeLeon arrives, audiences have been conditioned to expect ever-increasing spectacle, making the final race feel like appropriate culmination rather than arbitrary climax. Waugh also manages tonal consistency that some action directors struggle to maintain. Need for Speed takes itself seriously without becoming self-important, believes in its characters without pretending they're profound, and commits to spectacle while acknowledging consequences. That balance keeps the film watchable, even when plot mechanics strain credibility. We believe these people believe in what they're doing, and Waugh's direction never undermines that sincerity with ironic distance. The music, throttle, and score. Nathan First's musical score walks a difficult line between contemporary action film bombast and something more textured that reflects the specific culture Need for Speed depicts. The main themes incorporate both orchestral elements and electronic textures, creating a hybrid sound that feels modern without becoming dated to 2014's musical trends. During driving sequences, the score often steps back, allowing engine noise and environmental audio to dominate, recognizing that sometimes a well-tuned exhaust note communicates more than any musical composition could. Emotional moments receive more traditional scoring strings during Pete's death, somber tones during Toby's imprisonment, building orchestration as the crew commits to the cross-country run. First avoids overwhelming these scenes with melodramatic music, instead providing support that enhances emotion without dictating how audiences should feel. The restraint serves the film's overall aesthetic, which values authenticity over manipulation. The De Leon sequence gets the most aggressive scoring, with driving percussion and building intensity that mirrors the race's escalating danger. Here, First finally unleashes full orchestral power, creating a soundscape that matches the visual spectacle while maintaining rhythmic patterns that sync with editing beats. The score becomes part of the race's momentum, pushing forward alongside the competing vehicles. Honor in a system without rules. Need for Speed builds its thematic foundation on a paradox, characters seeking honor and justice through inherently illegal means. The underground racing world operates entirely outside legal structures, yet maintains its own rigid code of conduct, where reputation and integrity matter more than law enforcement could ever enforce. Tobey's arc doesn't involve learning to respect authority. He serves his prison sentence, but never accepts the system's judgment as legitimate. Instead, it explores how someone maintains moral principles when conventional justice fails completely. US. The film argues that honor exists independent of legality. When Tobey slows during chases to avoid endangering civilians, when he stops to check on crash competitors, when he ultimately saves Dino despite having every reason to let him die, these choices don't align with his stated goal of winning the De Leon. They cost him time, risk, and advantage. But they define him as fundamentally different from Dino, who views rules as obstacles to manipulate rather than principles to uphold. The underground racing community recognizes this distinction. Monarch's broadcasts celebrate Tobey not just for speed, but for demonstrating that competition can exist without compromising character. This theme complicates typical action film morality, where protagonists operate outside the law but remain sympathetic through righteous cause. Tobey isn't stealing cars to feed his family or racing to save someone's life. He's pursuing personal vindication through spectacularly illegal activity. The film doesn't pretend this is socially responsible behavior. Instead, it suggests that when institutions fail to deliver justice, individuals must either accept that failure or create alternative systems where truth can be established. The De Leon represents such a system, dangerous, illegal, but ultimately more honest than courtrooms where wealth determines outcomes. Class and merit in American mythology. The Tobey-Dino rivalry embodies tensions between inherited privilege and earned skill that run through American cultural narratives. Dino has money, connections, professional racing credentials, and the institutional backing that makes his version of events automatically credible to authorities. Tobey has talent, but talent without resources remains invisible to systems designed to reward pedigree over performance. The Mustang project briefly promises to bridge that gap. Tobey's skill applied to Dino's funding should create something neither could achieve alone. ESWT. That partnership's collapse reveals the fundamental incompatibility between their worldviews. Dino sees Tobey as hired labor, a skilled craftsman who should know his place and accept that business success ultimately belongs to whoever provides capital. When Tobey's driving ability exceeds Dino's, threatening that hierarchy, violence becomes Dino's method of reasserting natural order. The film consistently frames this, not as individual personality flaw, but as systematic failure. Institutions protect Dino because he represents their class interests, regardless of actual guilt or innocence. Non. The Garage Crew's loyalty to Tobey reflects working-class solidarity against those institutional powers. They risk their own freedom, their livelihoods, their safety to support someone they believe was wronged by a system rigged against people like them. This isn't romanticized poverty. The film shows how financial stress limits their options, how Tobey's inability to pay legal fees contributes to his conviction, but it does suggest that communities built on mutual respect and shared struggle create bonds stronger than those based purely on economic transaction. Non 2. The De Leon itself functions as meritocratic fantasy, a space where wealth provides no inherent advantage beyond affording faster cars. But even that advantage gets neutralized when the race begins. Tobey's exhausted Mustang competing against Dino's pristine Lamborghini proves that determination and skill can overcome material superiority. It's wish fulfillment, certainly, but wish fulfillment rooted in specifically American mythology about individual merit transcending structural inequality, not. Masculinity and mechanical connection. Need for Speed depicts masculinity almost entirely through relationships with machines and other men, a choice that reveals both the film's thematic interests and its limitations. Tobey's identity centers on his ability to understand cars at an intuitive level. He doesn't just drive them, he dialogues with them, feeling feedback through steering wheel and pedals that inform split-second decisions. This mechanical empathy represents his primary form of emotional expression, more articulate than his sparse verbal communication. The film associates this car-focused masculinity with positive traits: patience, precision, care for craft, respect for tools and machines. Tobey and his crew maintain vehicles meticulously, understanding that performance requires dedication beyond simply pressing the accelerator. They view cars as partners requiring constant attention and maintenance, a perspective that extends metaphorically to their friendships. Relationships that need tending, that break down when neglected. Represents toxic alternative, masculinity defined by domination and possession rather than skill and partnership. He doesn't build or maintain cars, he purchases them, uses them, and discards them when they no longer serve his purposes. His treatment of vehicles mirrors his treatment of people. Anita becomes another acquisition, Pete becomes collateral damage, Tobey becomes obstacle to eliminate. The film draws clear distinction between these masculine modes. One creates and preserves, the other consumes and destroys. The absence of substantial female perspectives limits this thematic exploration. Julia exists as exception, a woman who can speak the automotive language fluently enough to earn respect from men who don't typically grant it. But she remains singular rather than representative, and the film never interrogates why this world attracts primarily men or what that homogeneity reveals about car culture's values. The result is thematic examination that recognizes different masculine expressions without questioning masculinity's dominance in these spaces. Grief and impossible redemption. Pete's death creates narrative engine that drives the entire film, but more importantly, it establishes grief as Tobey's constant companion throughout his journey. The cross-country run isn't healing. Racing thousands of miles at dangerous speeds while being hunted by bounty hunters and police doesn't process trauma. It's displacement activity, energy channeled into achievable goal when emotional wounds remain beyond repair. The film acknowledges this honestly. Tobey knows exposing Dino won't bring Pete back. He knows winning the DeLeon changes nothing about his friend being dead, but he pursues these objectives anyway because grief demands action even when action accomplishes nothing. This psychological accuracy, the way loss creates desperate need to do something, anything, that feels like progress, grounds the film's more absurd elements in recognizable human behavior. The crew's shared grief manifests differently across characters. Finn buries himself in technical problems that have solutions. Benny maintains constant verbal stream of consciousness that fills silence where mourning might otherwise intrude. Joe and Jody throw themselves into logistics and planning, creating structure around chaos. Each coping mechanism reveals how men in this culture process emotion through action, through competence, through anything except direct acknowledgement of pain. Anita's position as both Pete's sister and Dino's fiancée creates unbearable dramatic irony that the film never fully exploits. She grieves her brother while building life with his killer, and whether she suspects the truth remains ambiguous. This unresolved thread reflects the film's broader theme. Some losses create damage that no amount of justice or revenge can truly address. C. Speed as spiritual practice. The film's treatment of driving approaches something almost religious, framing the perfect lap or clean overtake as transcendent experiences that connect drivers to something beyond mundane existence. Monarch's broadcast reinforced this interpretation, describing racing in language more appropriate to mystical pursuit than illegal street competition. He talks about the De Leon as pilgrimage, about drivers seeking enlightenment through velocity, and while the dialogue risks pretension, it articulates worldview the film genuinely believes. Tobey's relationship with the Mustang demonstrates this quasi-spiritual dimension. He doesn't simply operate the vehicle, he merges with it, human and machine becoming a unified system where distinctions between driver input and mechanical response blur. During peak performance moments, the film shows Tobey entering flow state, where conscious thought disappears and instinct governs every movement. This isn't supernatural, it's extreme competence producing experience that feels transcendent. The danger inherent in high-speed driving adds stakes that transform it from sport into something more profound. Every race carries possibility of death, and confronting that mortality repeatedly requires psychological framework that normalizes existential risk. The underground racing community constructs such frameworks through ritual and mythology, treating their pursuit as noble calling despite obvious recklessness. Whether this represents genuine philosophical depth or elaborate justification for adrenaline addiction remains deliberately ambiguous. The American Road as character. The cross-country journey taps into deep American cultural associations between personal freedom and open highways. The road trip narrative has dominated American storytelling for generations because it literalizes psychological journeys. Physical distance traveled equals emotional transformation achieved. Tobey's drive from New York to California follows this template, using geography to mark internal progression from wrongfully convicted felon to vindicated warrior. The film presents American landscape as both obstacle and opportunity. Vast distances that would separate communities in other nations become proving grounds where skill and determination get tested across thousands of miles. Different terrains demand different driving approaches. Tight urban corridors require precision. Open highways reward raw speed. Mountain passes test nerve and judgment. By crossing these varied spaces, Tobey demonstrates comprehensive mastery, proving he belongs at the De Leon not through single impressive performance, but through sustained excellence across continental expanse. Neo. This geography also reinforces class themes. Dino can fly to California in hours, purchasing convenience through wealth. Tobey must drive, experiencing every mile, every risk, every moment of the journey that privilege allows others to skip. The film values this arduous path, suggesting that shortcuts, whether geographic or ethical, hollow out achievement. Real victory requires covering actual ground, absorbing physical and emotional toll of the distance. Justice versus revenge. The distinction between justice and revenge remains blurry throughout. Need for Speed, perhaps intentionally so. Tobey claims he wants to expose Dino's crime and clear his own name, legitimate objectives that fall under justice's umbrella. But the methods involve risking lives, including his own, destroying property, and evading law enforcement across multiple states. At what point does pursuit of justice become revenge, dressed in righteous language? The film suggests the answer lies in choices made when achieving goals becomes possible. Tobey has multiple opportunities to let Dino die during the De Leon accidents happen, cars crash, and Pete's death would be poetically balanced by Dino perishing in similar fashion. Instead, Tobey saves him, pulling him from wreckage before it explodes. That choice reframes everything that came before. This was never about making Dino suffer. It was about forcing truth into light, regardless of personal cost. Julia's evidence gathering provides the mechanism that transforms revenge plot into justice delivered. She documents Dino's bounty, collects testimonies, builds case that will hold up in legal proceedings. Her involvement shifts the narrative from individual vendetta to something more systematic. One person's quest for vengeance becoming multiple people's effort to correct judicial error. The crew's support operates similarly, distributing moral weight across enough characters that no single person bears full responsibility for the illegal means employed. The film ultimately argues that justice requires risk from those seeking it. Systems designed to deliver justice often fail, protecting powerful at expense of vulnerable. When that happens, individuals must choose between accepting injustice or pursuing dangerous alternatives that may restore truth but guarantee consequences. Tobey's return to prison after exposing Dino suggests the film recognizes this paradox. He achieved justice but paid steep price, and whether that trade-off was worth it remains question. The ending leaves partially unanswered. Entering a crowded genre. When Need for Speed arrived in March 2014, it faced the unenviable task of distinguishing itself in a marketplace already dominated by the Fast and Furious franchise, which had spent 13 years building a devoted global audience through increasingly spectacular set pieces and ensemble cast chemistry. Fast 5 had redefined the series 3 years earlier by shifting from street racing to heist thriller territory, essentially abandoning the car culture roots that originally defined the franchise. That evolution left a vacuum for films interested in pure racing narratives, and Need for Speed attempted to fill that space with a back-to-basics approach, emphasizing driving skill over criminal enterprise. The timing proved both advantageous and challenging. Audiences hungry for vehicular action had proven themselves willing to support car-focused films with substantial box office returns. However, those same audiences had been conditioned to expect certain conventions, found family dynamics, escalating absurdity, international locations that Need for Speed deliberately avoided. The film's commitment to American settings, grounded stunt work, and singular protagonists pursuing personal vendetta positioned it as alternative rather than competitor to Fast and Furious, though marketing struggled to communicate that distinction effectively. Video game adaptations carried their own baggage in 2014. Hollywood's track record with translating gaming properties to cinema remained dismal, with most attempts failing to satisfy either gamers or general audiences. The Need for Speed franchise presented unique adaptation challenges because the games focused on gameplay mechanics rather than narrative. Players cared about vehicle selection, customization options, and racing physics, not storytelling. Director Scott Waugh and the Gattens brothers' screenplay approached this by treating the game's title as brand recognition rather than source material to faithfully adapt, constructing an original revenge thriller that simply shared DNA with the game's automotive enthusiasm. Aaron Paul's transition from television prestige. Aaron Paul's casting represented a calculated gamble on whether prestige television success could translate to theatrical action-leading man status. Breaking Bad had concluded its celebrated run 6 months before Need for Speed's release, leaving Paul's Jesse Pinkman performance fresh in audience consciousness. That role had showcased dramatic range, vulnerability, and intensity that earned him 3 Emmy Awards, but it also typed him as a specific character, damaged, manic, reactive, rather than proactive. Toby Marshall required different energy, focused determination, physical competence, leadership qualities that command respect from crew and audience alike. Paul brought the intensity that made Jesse Pinkman compelling, but channeled it into controlled performance that emphasized quiet strength over explosive outbursts. The physicality demanded by extensive driving sequences, performed largely by Paul himself after racing school training, demonstrated commitment to the role beyond merely reciting dialogue. Whether mainstream audiences were prepared to accept him as action hero remained an open question that the film's box office performance would ultimately answer. The film also served as proof of concept for Paul's Breaking Bad career trajectory. A successful turn in a major studio action film could establish him as versatile talent capable of leading franchise properties, opening doors beyond the prestige drama that defined his television work. The risk cut both ways. A high-profile failure might relegate him to character actor status, limiting future opportunities to carry films as leading man. Practical effects in the CGI era. Need for Speed's production philosophy arrived at a moment when practical stunt work had become increasingly rare in mainstream action filmmaking. The previous decade had seen digital effects, technology advance to the point where virtually any action sequence could be created entirely in computers, with actors performing against green screens and stunt coordinators replaced by VFX supervisors. This shift offered advantages: safer working conditions, unlimited revision possibilities, reduced insurance costs, but sacrificed the visceral authenticity that characterized action cinema's earlier eras. Scott Waugh's insistence on practical stunts represented both artistic statement and marketing angle. The production could differentiate itself from competitors by emphasizing real cars, real speeds, real danger captured on camera. Behind-the-scenes footage showcasing the complexity of stunt coordination, the mathematical precision required to execute sequences safely, and the dedication of drivers pushing vehicles to their limits provided compelling promotional material that resonated with audiences skeptical of CGI-heavy blockbusters. This approach carried significant financial risk. Practical stunts require extensive preparation, multiple takes for coverage, and acceptance that irreplaceable vehicles will be destroyed during filming. The production's decision to flip a genuine Koenigsegg Agera, albeit a modified replica for Pete's death scene, represented hundreds of thousands of dollars committed to a single shot with no reset button available. Insurance costs escalated accordingly, as did shooting schedules that needed to accommodate the reality that complex practical sequences couldn't be fixed in post-production if something went wrong during capture. The film's release coincided with growing awareness among certain audience segments that digital effects, while visually impressive, could create emotional disconnect from action sequences. Superhero films in particular had begun facing criticism for climactic battles that felt weightless despite spectacular destruction, with heroes and villains bouncing through CGI environments that lacked physical consequence. Need for Speed offered counterpoint: every crash hurt, every near miss carried genuine danger, and audiences could subconsciously recognize the authenticity even if they couldn't articulate Why the stunts felt more impactful than digital alternatives. Critical reception and box office reality. Need for Speed opened to mixed reviews that praised its practical stunt work while criticizing narrative predictability and character development. Critics acknowledge the impressive technical achievements but question whether spectacular car chases could sustain feature-length runtime when wrapped in familiar revenge plot mechanics. The film's earnest tone, which avoided ironic distance or self-aware humor, struck some reviewers as dated in an era when successful action films typically winked at their own absurdity. Roger Ebert's site awarded the film 2 stars, with reviewer Matt Zoller Seitz acknowledging the stunt work's quality while finding the overall package dramatically inert. This represented the critical consensus: impressive craftsmanship in service of unremarkable storytelling. Rotten Tomatoes aggregated these assessments into a 22% critic score, indicating broad rejection from professional reviewers despite occasional appreciation for individual elements. 1. Audience response proved more generous, with Rotten Tomatoes users rating the film at 58%, suggesting that viewers prioritize spectacle over narrative sophistication. This gap between critical and audience reception is common for action films, but it indicated that Need for Speed successfully delivered what its target demographic wanted: visceral car chases, clear protagonist motivation, and cathartic resolution. Even if critics found those elements insufficient. Dopstick box office performance disappointed relative to the film's $66 million production budget and substantial marketing spend. Need for Speed earned $43.6 million in North American theaters, falling well short of profitability on domestic returns alone. International markets provided crucial support, with worldwide totals reaching $203 million, enough to avoid outright failure but insufficient to justify immediate sequel development. The financial performance suggested audience appetite for car-focused action existed, but perhaps not at the level studios hoped, or that the film's marketing failed to effectively communicate its unique selling propositions to potential ticket buyers. Video game. Brand leverage and limitations. The Need for Speed gaming franchise brought built-in name recognition, but also created expectations that the film couldn't fully satisfy. The game's appeal centered on player agency, choosing vehicles, customizing performance, selecting racing styles, elements that couldn't translate to linear cinema where audiences observe rather than participate. Gamers familiar with the franchise entered theaters, expecting specific cars, iconic races, or gameplay moments recreated on screen, while the film pursued its own narrative identity that merely borrowed the brand's automotive enthusiasm. This disconnect manifested in fan reactions that criticized the film for insufficient connection to game continuity and aesthetics. Where were the iconic police chases from Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit? Why didn't the customization culture from Underground receive more emphasis? The film's original story, while avoiding the common pitfall of slavish game adaptation, left devoted fans feeling the Need for Speed branding was superficial rather than integral. This tension illustrated broader challenges facing video game adaptations: serve the existing fan base and risk alienating general audiences, or create accessible stories for mainstream viewers and disappoint the built-in audience that branding was meant to attract. Electronic Arts' involvement as licensor rather than creative partner meant the film operated with relative freedom from corporate oversight that might have mandated specific game references or narrative directions. This independence allowed Waugh and the production team to craft the film they wanted rather than the one game publishers might have demanded. But it also meant the final product carried fewer elements that gaming fans could identify as authentically. Need for Speed beyond the title card. Industry relationships. The production's relationship with car manufacturers created interesting dynamics around vehicle selection and presentation. Ford provided extensive support given the Shelby Mustang's central role, recognizing the marketing value of showcasing American performance engineering in a major theatrical release. The custom-built Mustang became a character in itself, a rolling advertisement for what American automotive design could achieve when pushed to exotic extremes. European manufacturers proved more cautious. Some provided vehicles for featured roles, viewing the exposure as valuable brand positioning in performance car markets. Others declined involvement, concerned about associations with illegal street racing or worried that depicting their vehicles getting destroyed in crashes might communicate unreliability rather than excitement. These negotiations required diplomatic balancing between production needs, manufacturer concerns, and audience expectations about which cars should populate an automotive action film. The Koenigsegg situation illustrated these complexities perfectly. The Swedish hypercar manufacturer's vehicles featured prominently in the fatal opening race, but regulatory issues prevented importing actual Agaras for filming. The production constructed remarkably accurate replicas that satisfied visual requirements while meeting safety standards for stunt work, a solution that preserved the manufacturer's brand presence without requiring them to sacrifice genuine million-dollar vehicles for camera. These compromises happened throughout production, with the final vehicle lineup representing negotiated outcomes between ideal casting and practical availability. Notches. Influence on subsequent car films need. For Speed's emphasis on practical stunt work, influenced conversations around automotive action filmmaking, even if its commercial performance didn't justify direct sequels. The behind-the-scenes documentation of stunt coordination and real speed filming provided reference points for subsequent productions considering similar approaches. While the Fast and Furious franchise continued favoring CGI-enhanced spectacle, smaller-budget car films increasingly cited Need for Speed's methodology as proof that practical work remained viable for modern productions. The film also demonstrated challenges facing non-franchise action films in contemporary marketplace. Without established characters or universe to build upon, original action properties struggled to justify the marketing budgets required to reach global audiences. Need for Speed's mixed commercial returns reinforced studio risk aversion regarding standalone action films, contributing to industry trends that favored sequels, remakes, and adaptations over original concepts. Ties. Aaron Paul's performance, while generally praised, didn't launch him into action stardom the way the production might have hoped. His subsequent career focused primarily on prestige television and supporting film roles rather than leading man action vehicles, suggesting either that audiences didn't embrace him in that capacity or that he chose to pursue different material. The film served as an interesting experiment in television to film actor transition without definitively answering whether such transitions could succeed outside superhero franchises that dominated Hollywood's action landscape. Underground racing culture representation. The film's depiction of street racing culture received mixed responses from actual participants in those communities. Some appreciated the emphasis on driving skill and mechanical knowledge over Hollywood's typical portrayal of racers as simple adrenaline junkies. The respect shown for vehicle preparation, the importance of crew support, and the consequences of mistakes resonated with people whose lives actually revolved around automotive performance. Others criticized the romanticization of illegal racing and the unrealistic portrayal of police response. Real street racing faces intense law enforcement crackdown, with consequences extending far beyond traffic citations. The film's relatively gentle treatment of these legal ramifications, Tobey serves time but emerges ready to race again, downplayed the reality that street racing convictions can result in permanent vehicle seizure, felony records, and destroyed lives. This tension between dramatic necessity and authentic representation plagued the film's relationship with communities it ostensibly celebrated. The absence of serious injuries or deaths beyond Pete's scripted tragedy also drew criticism from those familiar with street racing's genuine dangers. Real underground racing produces regular casualties, not because participants are reckless, but because the margin for error at high speeds is microscopically thin. By sanitizing these consequences for mainstream palatability, the film arguably glorified dangerous behavior without adequately communicating the risks that real people accept when they engage in similar activities. Streaming era. Reassessment. Need for Speed found renewed audience in the streaming era, where its straightforward action narrative and impressive practical stunts attracted viewers seeking uncomplicated entertainment. Freed from theatrical box office pressure and positioned alongside countless other options, the film could be appreciated for its craftsmanship, without requiring it to justify $66 million production budgets or compete with Fast and Furious franchise entries. This second life through streaming platforms introduced the film to audiences who missed its theatrical run or heard about it primarily through critical dismissal. The ability to watch without financial commitment beyond subscription costs lowered barriers to discovery, allowing viewers to form their own opinions without the risk of feeling cheated by ticket prices if the film didn't meet expectations. Word-of-mouth recommendations through social media helped build cult appreciation for the practical stunt work and Aaron Paul's committed performance. The streaming context also benefited the film's reputation by separating it temporally from 2014's competitive release calendar. Viewed years later without direct comparison to that year's other action offerings, Need for Speed could be assessed on its own merits rather than as failed Fast and Furious competitor. This reassessment didn't transform critical consensus. The narrative limitations remained evident, but it allowed appreciation for what the film achieved technically to exist without being overshadowed by commercial disappointment. Need for Speed occupies a peculiar position in early 2010s action cinema, a film that committed fully to a specific vision even as that vision contradicted prevailing industry trends. While blockbusters increasingly relied on digital effects to create impossible spectacle, Scott Waugh insisted on practical stunts that carried genuine physical risk. While successful franchises built ensemble casts with interwoven storylines spanning multiple films, Need for Speed told a self-contained revenge narrative focused on a single protagonist's cross-country journey. While competitors embraced ironic distance and self-aware humor, this film played its hand straight, believing in the inherent drama of cars, speed, and honor without apologizing for that belief. That sincerity represents both the film's greatest strength and its most significant vulnerability. Audiences accustomed to action movies that wink at their own absurdity sometimes struggle to engage with material that asks for unironic investment in concepts like racing to restore reputation or risking everything for vindication. The script's earnest dialogue about honor, brotherhood, and redemption through driving can feel overwrought to viewers expecting more sophisticated emotional complexity. Yet that same commitment gives the film identity that more cynical approaches might have diluted. This is a movie about people who genuinely believe that who you are gets revealed behind the wheel, and the filmmakers share that faith without reservation. The practical stunt work remains the most compelling argument for Need for Speed's artistic merit. A decade into the digital effects revolution, the film demonstrated that physical stunts could still generate excitement that CGI struggled to replicate. The weight of real cars colliding, the precision required to execute dangerous maneuvers without safety nets provided by post-production, the knowledge that what appears on screen actually happened rather than being assembled by visual effects artists. These elements create visceral impact that distinguishes the film from contemporaries relying primarily on digital fabrication. Whether that distinction justified the additional cost, time, and risk involved remains a legitimate question, but the final product makes a strong case that some forms of spectacle lose essential quality when translated from practical execution to digital creation. Aaron Paul's performance deserves recognition for what it attempted, even if the results didn't transform his career trajectory. He committed physically to the role, learning to drive at professional racing levels and performing much of his own stunt work rather than relying exclusively on doubles. The intensity he brought to Toby Marshall communicated genuine obsession, driving the character's choices, making believable the otherwise implausible decision to risk everything crossing a continent for a chance at vindication. The fact that the film didn't establish Paul as action-leading man may say more about marketplace realities than performance quality. Original action properties without franchise potential face tremendous barriers regardless of lead actor capabilities. 9T. The film's relationship with its video game source material reveals broader challenges facing adaptations of interactive media. Games succeed by offering players agency, by letting them make meaningful choices that shape outcomes. Cinema denies that agency by definition. Audiences watch predetermined narratives unfold without input into how events proceed. Need for Speed navigated this tension by essentially ignoring it, creating an original story that shared the game's automotive enthusiasm without attempting to recreate gameplay experiences on screen. This approach satisfied neither gamers wanting direct adaptation nor general audiences potentially confused about why a racing game became a revenge thriller, illustrating that video game branding can hinder as much as help theatrical releases. The themes. Need for Speed explores honor, outside legal structures, class conflict manifested through automotive culture, masculinity defined through mechanical competence, connect to American mythologies that extend back through decades of car films, road movies, and westerns. Toby Marshall follows a lineage of wronged men seeking justice through skill and determination, a character type that resonates because it promises that individual merit still matters in systems rigged to favor wealth and connection. That the film tells this story through automotive spectacle rather than gunfights or sword duels simply updates the vehicle, literally and figuratively, through which these persistent cultural narratives get expressed. Where the film stumbles is in examining its own assumptions about who gets to participate in these narratives and whose perspectives matter when telling them. The near-total absence of substantial female characters beyond Julia, the homogeneous racial composition of the central crew, the unquestioned assumption that car culture naturally centers on male bonding. These limitations don't necessarily invalidate what Need for Speed achieves, but they do reveal a lack of curiosity about whether alternative perspectives might enrich or complicate its thematic exploration. The film accepts its demographic focus as given, rather than questioning what that focus includes and excludes. The film proved that practical stunts could still be executed safely at Hollywood scale, that audiences did respond to authenticity even in an effects-driven era, and that video game adaptations could pursue original narratives rather than slavishly recreating game content. These lessons influenced subsequent productions, even if Need for Speed itself didn't spawn a franchise or redefine genre conventions. Sometimes a film's legacy lies not in immediate commercial triumph, but in demonstrating possibilities that later projects refine and improve upon. For viewers discovering Need for Speed years after its theatrical release, divorced from box office expectations and critical dismissal, the film offers straightforward pleasures that more ambitious or ironic approaches might complicate. There's clarity to its structure. Man wronged, man seeks justice, justice achieved through skill and sacrifice. That provides narrative satisfaction even when predictability undercuts surprise. The driving sequences deliver kinetic excitement without requiring intellectual engagement beyond appreciating the craft involved. Sometimes that's precisely what action cinema should provide: competently executed spectacle in service of emotionally direct storytelling that doesn't apologize for its simplicity. The film also serves as time capsule for a particular moment in action filmmaking history, capturing tensions between practical and digital effects, between franchise imperatives and standalone storytelling, between prestige television actors seeking film careers and studio risk aversion, limiting opportunities. These industry dynamics shaped what Need for Speed could be as much as creative decisions did, making the film interesting not just for what appears on screen, but for what it reveals about Hollywood's evolution during the early 2010s, e.g., ultimately, Need for Speed asks audiences to believe that speed matters, that honor can be found in illegal racing, that crossing a continent behind the wheel represents meaningful journey rather than just expensive spectacle. The film earns that belief through commitment to its own convictions, through practical craftsmanship that demonstrates respect for the action sequences it presents, and through performances that take the material seriously even when the material risks becoming ridiculous. Not every viewer will accept the premise, but those who do will find a film that delivers exactly what it promises: American muscle cars, cross-country redemption, and the persistent fantasy that skill can overcome systemic injustice if you're willing to push hard enough, drive fast enough, and never look back until you cross the finish line. The lineage of American car cinema. Need for Speed didn't emerge from a vacuum. It arrived carrying DNA from 5 decades of American films that treated automobiles as more than transportation. The most direct ancestor is 1968's Bullitt, which revolutionized action cinema with its 10-minute San Francisco chase sequence that prioritized geographic coherence and driving skill over rapid editing and musical manipulation. Steve McQueen's methodical pursuit through hilly streets, the way the camera held on extended, takes that let audiences comprehend speed and spatial relationships, the emphasis on actual driving rather than stunt gimmickry. These elements established a template that Need for Speed explicitly references through its own commitment to practical geography and sustained takes during chase sequences. Vanishing Point, released in 1971, contributed different genetic material: the cross-country race against time, the existential dimension of driving as spiritual pursuit, the outlaw hero pursued by authorities who gradually becomes folk legend through radio broadcasts, Kowalski's delivery driver pushing a Dodge Challenger from Colorado to San Francisco in impossible time-frame mirrors, Tobey's New York to California run, and Monarch's pirate radio narration directly echoes Super Soul's DJ commentary that turned Kowalski's flight into mythology. Both films understand that American car culture contains quasi-religious elements, that for certain people, the act of driving at extreme speeds represents something approaching transcendence rather than mere transportation or even sport. An action sequence is staged with geometric precision that emphasized craft over chaos. Need for Speed inherits this focus on competence as character. Tobey doesn't need extensive backstory or psychological complexity because his identity gets communicated through how he drives, through decisions made at 150 miles per hour that reveal ethics and priorities more clearly than dialogue ever could. What separates Need for Speed from these predecessors is context and scale. Bullet, Vanishing Point, and The Driver operated in analog era where practical stunts were the only option, where their commitment to real driving wasn't artistic choice, but technical necessity. Need for Speed made that commitment in 2014, when digital alternatives could have created any action sequence imaginable with less risk and often less expense. That decision transforms practical work from default approach into conscious artistic statement about what makes action sequences effective and emotionally resonant. Distance from Fast and Furious. The most important comparison for understanding Need for Speed's identity involves what it isn't, a Fast and Furious film. By 2004, that franchise had evolved through 6 entries into something barely recognizable as car cinema, with the racing element becoming backdrop for heist plots, international espionage, and increasingly physics-defying action that valued spectacle over automotive authenticity. Cars still appeared, but they functioned as accessories to broader action rather than the primary focus. 1. Need for Speed positioned itself as corrective to that evolution, returning to street racing as subject rather than setting. Where Fast and Furious films by 2014 featured cars driving through cargo planes and leaping between skyscrapers, Need for Speed kept its vehicles on roads obeying mostly comprehensible physics. Where Dominic Toretto's crew had become globe-trotting action heroes, Toby Marshall remained recognizable as actual street racer whose skills, while exceptional, stayed within human capabilities, not HW. The tonal differences prove equally significant. Fast and Furious embraced found family melodrama, with characters delivering speeches about loyalty and family that became franchise signatures. Need for Speed avoided that emotional register, keeping relationships functional rather than sentimental. The crew supports Tobey because they share history and grief, not because they need to articulate their bond through dialogue. This restraint reads as more masculine, perhaps, or simply less interested in the soap opera elements that gave Fast and Furious its particular flavor. Commercially, the comparison proved devastating. Fast and Furious 6 had earned $788 million worldwide the previous year, demonstrating the franchise's global dominance. Need for Speed's $203 million total looked respectable in isolation but underwhelming when measured against the competitor whose audience it hoped to attract. The box office verdict suggested that mainstream audiences preferred Fast and Furious's heightened approach over Need for Speed's relative grounding. That spectacle trumped authenticity when ticket buyers made their choices. The 2014 action landscape Need for Speed released into an action film environment undergoing significant transformation. That same year saw John Wick redefine contemporary action through its gun-fu choreography and world-building that treated assassin culture as elaborate subculture with its own rules and geography. The Indonesian film The Raid 2 expanded on its predecessor's innovative martial arts sequences with even more ambitious set pieces that demonstrated how much visceral impact could be generated through practical fight choreography. Edge of Tomorrow brought science fiction intelligence to blockbuster action using time loop mechanics to deconstruct and reconstruct typical alien invasion scenarios. Each of these films pushed action cinema in specific directions. John Wick toward stylized violence as ballet, The Raid 2 toward martial arts as narrative language, Edge of Tomorrow toward intellectually engaging genre exercises. Need for Speed's contribution to this conversation centered on automotive action specifically, arguing that car chases still had untapped potential when approached with sufficient commitment to practical execution. It didn't aspire to redefine action cinema broadly, but rather to demonstrate excellence within a specific subcategory that had been neglected or diluted by franchises pursuing different priorities. At $66 million, Need for Speed cost significantly more than John Wick's reported $20-30 million, but far less than typical superhero tentpoles commanding $150-250 million budgets. This middle ground was rapidly disappearing from Hollywood's production slate as studios increasingly bet on either modest-budget genre films or massive franchise entries, with little room for properties like Need for Speed that required substantial investment without guaranteed franchise potential. The film's financial performance contributed to that trend's acceleration. Why risk $66 million on an unproven property when franchise sequels offered more predictable returns? Revenge thriller, mechanics, strip away the automotive elements, and Need for Speed follows revenge thriller architecture that extends back through countless films about wronged men seeking justice outside legal systems. the setup protagonist framed for crime, serves time, emerges with singular focus on exposing the person who destroyed his life, could describe dozens of action films across multiple decades. What distinguishes individual entries in this overcrowded category comes down to execution details and the specific arena where revenge gets pursued. The wrongful conviction element connects to films like The Fugitive, where Harrison Ford's Dr. Richard Kimball spends the entire runtime trying to prove innocence while evading authorities convinced of his guilt. Both films understand that audience investment requires believing absolutely in the protagonist's innocence, that any moral ambiguity would compromise the cathartic satisfaction when truth finally emerges. Need for Speed establishes Tobey's innocence unambiguously in the opening act. We witness Dino's crime, see the betrayal, understand the injustice, so the remainder of the film can focus on how justice gets achieved rather than whether it should be. The cross-country pursuit structure borrows from road movies like Mad Max, or even non-action films like It Happened One Night, using geography as both obstacle course and metaphor for psychological journey. Each mile traveled toward the De Leon represents progress toward confrontation that will either vindicate or destroy Tobey, with the physical distance making abstract concepts of honor and justice tangible through landscapes crossed and dangers survived. Where Need for Speed deviates from standard revenge thriller templates is in its resolution. Typical entries in the genre climax with the protagonist killing the antagonist, delivering violent justice that satisfies audience bloodlust while conveniently eliminating the need for legal proceedings afterward. Tobey saving Dino's life complicates that satisfaction. The villain survives to face legal consequences, which feels more just but perhaps less cathartic than watching him die in flames as Pete did. This choice elevates Tobey morally, while potentially frustrating viewers conditioned to expect revenge thrillers to end with revenge delivered fatally. Video game. Adaptation, evolution. Need for Speed arrived during an era when video game adaptations were attempting to escape their reputation as automatic failures. The previous decade had delivered a string of critically and commercially disappointing game-to-film translations that suggested the medium transition might be fundamentally impossible. Resident Evil had found financial success but critical rejection. Silent Hill managed atmospheric horror but confused narrative. Attempts to adapt fighting games, puzzle games, and adventure games consistently produced results that satisfied neither gamers nor general audiences. The core challenge stems from fundamental medium differences. Games succeed through player agency. You make choices, experience consequences, develop skills through repetition and failure. Cinema denies that agency, asking audiences to watch predetermined narratives where they have no input. Faithful adaptations that try to recreate gameplay mechanics on screen often produce incomprehensible results for non-players, while loose adaptations that ignore game content frustrate fans who wanted to see their experience translated visually. Need for Speed's approach: take the brand recognition and automotive enthusiasm, but construct an original narrative, represented one strategy for navigating this tension. It avoided the adaptation trap by not really adapting anything, using the Need for Speed title as marketing hook rather than source material requiring faithful translation. This liberated the creative team to make a film that worked on its own terms without needing to serve game continuity or mechanics. Later successful game adaptations would use similar strategies. Detective Pikachu worked by creating original story within Pokemon universe rather than adapting specific game plot. Sonic the Hedgehog built family-friendly adventure that used the character without recreating gameplay. The lesson Need for Speed helped establish was that brand recognition could open doors, but successful films required treating the adaptation as inspiration rather than blueprint. The practical stunt conversation. When discussing Need for Speed's technical approach, context matters enormously. The film arrived just as conversations about practical versus digital effects were intensifying within industry circles and among engaged audiences. Christopher Nolan had spent years advocating for practical effects in IMAX cinematography, arguing that digital tools should enhance rather than replace physical filmmaking. The mission? Impossible franchise, particularly Ghost Protocol's Burj Khalifa sequence, where Tom Cruise actually scaled the building's exterior, demonstrated that practical stunts could still generate marketing buzz and audience excitement that CGI couldn't replicate. George Miller was simultaneously preparing Mad Max, Fury Road, which would release a year after Need for Speed, and vindicate the practical approach spectacularly with its Namibian desert stunts that redefined what car action could achieve. That film's overwhelming critical and commercial success, its 10 Academy Award nominations, and recognition as instant classic, proved that practical work wasn't nostalgic throwback, but viable path forward for action cinema. Need for Speed contributed to this movement by demonstrating the methodology at Hollywood scale. The extensive behind-the-scenes documentation of how stunts were planned, calculated, and executed provided case study for other filmmakers considering similar approaches. Even if the film's overall reception disappointed, the respect accorded to its stunt work validated the technique and encouraged subsequent productions to explore practical options before defaulting to digital solutions. The conversation continues evolving. Top Gun. Maverick's insistence on capturing real fighter jet footage with actors experiencing actual G-forces. Mission Impossible's ongoing commitment to death, defying practical stunts, even John Wick's preference for long takes with actors performing their own fight choreography. These choices exist in dialogue with films like Need for Speed that argued practical work carries authenticity, digital alternatives struggle to match. The debate isn't settled, and likely never will be, but Need for Speed earned its place in the conversation through sheer commitment to doing things the hard way when easier paths existed.